Hey everyone, it's reading time with Pickle. Um, so continuing on with our studies of psychological resilience, what I did in some previous videos was an example of, me reading through an article where researchers attempted to develop a measure of psychological resilience and kind of reading through that development and validation process with some skepticism and a bit of a critical eye as to what rather may have been done well, what may have been done not so well. So that's in the previous videos, but what I'd like to do in this video is one of my projects, and why I've been reading a lot about psychological resilience as of late, is to create my own measure of psychological resilience. And the first question that really comes to mind is why? Why would you reinvent the wheel? There's so many measures, different types of measures of psychological resilience. Do we really need another one? And in many cases, the answer is no. But in this specific case, I think the answer is probably, or at least it couldn't hurt. And the reason for that is primarily because, as a lot of systematic literature reviews have found, there is not a lot of good measures of psychological resilience. There might be a lot out there, but there are not a lot that have strong psychometric properties, that is, have strong evidence of validity, that the measure is actually measuring the theoretical definition or the construct of psychological resilience, rather than attempting to measure something else like a correlate or a covariate, like something that may help improve or hurt someone's psychological resilience, but not psychological resilience itself. A lot of measures are measuring the wrong thing accidentally. Second, a lot of measures don't have too much evidence of reliability. So first of all, how do we know that the measurement is consistent, that it's accurately measuring what it's intending to, or that it's accurately measuring something, whether it's not what we intend it to or not, that point, regardless, whether it's accurate in its measurement. So there are not a lot of existing measures out there that have those two properties of validity and reliability. And furthermore, there's this, I think, this underlying problem, which is causing a lot of confusion with these scales and resulting in these different types of scales that aren't like super great, is there's not a solid or shared conceptualization of what psychological resilience or resiliency is. And since different people, my faculty advisor mentioned that the problem is psychological resiliency is in the eye of the beholder right now. So different people, different scholars, different researchers, different practitioners, we all have different ideas of what psychological resiliency is, and we haven't distilled the actual components of what it is in, I think, a consistent way where we can come to a shared conceptualization of the construct. So all that blathering out of the way, the purpose of this project, I believe this project does have a place. And the purpose of this project is to support existing conceptualizations of psychological resilience that I think are actually accurate theoretical definitions of the construct, to create a measure that supports those definitions, to create items within those measures that, and this ties into the validity, to first establish the validity of the measure, to create items within those measures that are reasonably touching upon the different factors or the different ideas associated with psychological resilience. So first establishing content validity, and then designing a series of studies that we can do to further evidence other types of validity, whether it's convergent validity, discriminant validity, predictive validity, criterion validity, face validity, adding all those up, then working towards construct validity of the measure. But then also evidencing that our measurement is consistent. It's accurate in what it's measuring. It's actually going to measure psychological resilience instead of something that might be somewhat related. So first we're establishing that. And then the second thing that we're going to establish is that it's able to measure that consistently throughout time, throughout different people. Yeah. So let's get started. So I'm starting this pretty much from scratch. I have a handful of references or citations already, just stuff that I've been reading. There are more that I've read that I have not included yet. And it's limited. I haven't even started my reference list, but blank sheet. We have here research database to look up articles, different research database to look up articles, another search site that lets me find if I want additional research bases to look up articles. We're not going to do, we might do some looking up today, but really today what I want to do is come to a very broad stroked outline of what my article is going to look like, or what my development of the psychological measure is going to look like. And this is super broad. And what we're going to do, we're going to start from the broadest sense, and then we're going to get more and more and more detailed. So to start, let's just go off my memory. It's going to be in the sort of the most like broad stroke things that we can put in an article. Let's start. Abstract. Oops. Sure. Methods. Analysis. Discussion. Conclusion. Easy, right? So easy. We need to think about psychological resilience, and we need to think about psychometric tests. And we need to, let's start thinking about how are we going to start to build our argument. This abstract, that comes at the very end. We're just going to summarize all of this in our abstract. So I put it at the front because it comes at the front, but I'm not even going to worry about it. It's out of sight, out of mind. Down to the introduction, let's build up to the problem. Why do we need another measure of psychological resilience? And this is going to sound, what I'm going to do, it's super crude, and it's not going to be impressive. So don't hold me to any actual expectations here. Don't judge me. Okay. Equals, and I'm not drawing on any references right now. Remember that. These are just spitball ideas that we're going to work from, and we're going to update this. This is an iterative process. This is all going to get trashed and updated to something better. People psycho function. Daily function. Problem is, psychological resilience isn't well research. What I mean by that is different researchers seem to have different conceptualizations is ice. This is led to several scales over the past decades, which psychometric properties are lacking in quality psychometric properties. The thing is, I have citations for all of these ideas. I'm just spitballing my ideas out right now. Later, I'm going to find citations that I've drawn from these ideas, not to support these ideas. They are supporting these ideas, but I'm not just finding citations to like support my own opinion. My opinions are formed from these citations. And that's why it's kind of easy to find them later when you've done all the reading beforehand, when you've saved all your articles and ideally organized the thoughts in those articles, which I haven't, admittedly, but when your opinions are built from previous research, it's easy to find your citations. But if you're just like hard-headed, have an anecdotal opinion, you might not find things that support your thoughts. You might not. I think it's better to have an informed opinion, an opinion informed by previous research. Several skills being developed over the past decades, which are lacking in psychometric, in quality psychometric. And the quality, lacking in quality, which are lacking in quality properties. Is abundance, inconsistent. It's kind of a harsh word, but inconsistent. This inconsistency developed contributes to the problem of the lack of shared conceptualization construct. This impedes, undermines or impedes one's efforts to effectively study for both the state of ongoing research on psychological resilience, as well as for the practical as to prove the geez, we need to think about all the different reasons why people as individuals, people as groups, such as a community or a business, why they want to care about psychological resilience. It's really from like the IO psychology perspective, it's really easy to say something like, oh, you know, for selection, to improve. All right, let's do a simple. Cool. You know what, I'm not going to muddy myself up with this right now. We'll get into the nitty gritty later. Let's prove the quality of life of overall quality of life. And I know this is such a broad statement, but we'll dissect it and we'll improve it later. And this study will clarify and develop this study will develop and validate the measure will develop a measure of psychological resilience and propose several studies to establish validity and reliability. So the researcher will support existing theoretical definitions of the construct will attempt to evidence existing so why are we creating this measure? Again, we want to fix the problem. We want to create a good measure because there aren't a lot of good measures out there. But what does it mean to create a good measure? We want to fix the problem where there are different definitions of psychological resilience. I want to show or prove that as opposed to definition A, B, and C, I think definition Z is the most comprehensive and clear definition of psychological resilience. So this measure is going to be designed to show or prove that that definition is actually accurate, if that makes sense. Evidence that attempt to support, attempt to bring clarity to develop, attempt to, what's the right word here? I'm not developing my own definition, I'm taking a definition. Attempt to consolidate and conceptualization. What we're doing. It's not, it's a lot, but you can put it in like a sentence or two. Basically, what we're doing is we're fixing a problem or we're addressing a problem. What's the problem? The problem is that fundamentally different people have different opinions of what psychological resilience is. And many of those opinions result in scales or measures. Many of those opinions, I think, are poorly informed or poorly conceptualized, and they result in equally poorly conceptualized scales and measures, which aren't measuring psychological resilience. It's measuring something else is related to psychological resilience. I've seen something as far as like family support. I've seen how well one lets others help them, how open they are to letting others help them, but those aren't psychological resilience. In a roundabout way, those might affect someone's psychological resilience, but as an idea of what does it mean to be resilient, those aren't directly tied or inherently tied to that definition. So let's move on. All right, so we're going to overcome that challenge by first referring to the literature, and we're going to come up or identify a strong definition of the term. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to break that theory, that's called a theoretical definition of the construct. We're going to break that theoretical definition down into different parts to get a better idea of, okay, what are the different moving parts involved with psychological resilience at its essence? And we're going to create questions to measure those essential parts. And then we'll have some validation studies to propose to evidence, yes, our questions are good, or our conceptualization are good, or no, they're not good, they're inconsistent. They don't compare well with other relatively good measures of psychological resilience out there. So yes, it's good, or no, we're going to design those types of studies. And hopefully the answer will be yes, our measure is good. We can prove it's valid, it's reliable, and thus by extension, we can show that this definition, we can support this definition and hopefully convince more people to also refer to this definition as opposed to some others that may not be as succinct. So let's go to the literature review. The literature review is kind of like the introduction. The introduction's like the backdrop. The literature review is getting into more detail. So let's say psychological resilience is important to daily functioning and so we're going to need definitions of stuff like psychological resilience. We're going to need to review the histories. So if we're saying something like psychological resilience hasn't been well defined in prior research, we're going to have to actually review that history. Led to scales being developed over the past decades, which are lacking in quality and psychometric properties. We're going to have to evidence that and show some of these scales or review the timeline of some of these scales and why they're lacking. So the literature review is difficult because it's very comprehensive. It's, as mentioned, it's an extension of the introduction. What I like to do from this part forward, the easy part, the introduction is out of the way. Now we're getting into some of the harder parts. I like to review or refer to other articles of skill construction that have been published and peer reviewed, kind of see how they go through their literature review, whether it's about a scale of psychological resilience or whether it's about a different kind of scale. And I like to pick and choose what I like about their literature reviews, like what components or aspects of it that I find are convincing. Maybe it could be how they organize their literature review. Maybe it could be the specific topics that they cover. Maybe it could be their writing style. You know, a lot of different things that they can choose from about what I like and what I want to incorporate in my own. Then we'll start making notes about what we like or how we want to model our literature review and how we're going to organize it or outline it. Okay. So as mentioned, I like to refer to existing measures or existing studies which attempt to validate psychological resilience. We'll do Prince Embury. We'll go back to that article because we did it last week. There's a lot that I don't like about this one. I think it does a lot of things very well. I think it does some things not so well. I think this is a good one. Crystal Herald has created a measure of time theft. So they're in this study, they're literally doing the same thing that I'm going to be doing, except with time theft instead of psychological resilience. Let's do one more. Find one more. I'm just gonna throw caution to the wind. Articles. Let's do peer review. Wow, and recent development and validation of a brief measure of psychological resilience, state trait assessment of resilience scale. So maybe my work is redundant. Maybe not though, we'll see. What else have we got? Using the Canada version of the Conor Davidson resilience scale to assess resilience. Assessing psychological resilience, development and psychometric properties of the English and Dutch version of the resilience evaluation scale. Let's take a look. I'm just going to take a quick look to see how much I can actually glean from these. Psychoresilience, distinct factor affects mental health outcomes after adversity. Study describes development, validity, and measurement invariance of a Dutch and English scale. Separate online surveys with Dutch and English version of the RRS. Hypothesize measures. Exploratory factor analysis used. Two-factor structure for the final 9-item resilience scale. The factors reflected hypothesized underlying constructs, self-confidence and self-efficacy. See, again, this is kind of what I'm talking about. I should probably give you an example of what a good definition or what I think a good definition is, but self-confidence. I want to see how they. So here's an example, their introduction and their literature review, it really depends on the journal you're going to try to publish in, but their introduction and their literature review, it's all mixed into one. Let's see. How about this one? Development and validation of the brief measure of psychological resilience, the state trait assessment. So psychological resilience has been defined or referenced to in several different ways. There's psychological resilience as a trait. So that is the idea that our level, or we have the extent to which we are resilient in the face of significant adversity is fixed and is slightly different or similar based upon people. It's about as fixed as the color of our eye. It's not something that can fundamentally be changed within a person. It's inherent to them. That's the trait idea of psychological resilience. The state idea is, now let's say that someone is put into let's say that someone's living a comfortable life, daily life, nothing changes, going about their day as usual, no conflict, no adversity. And then they're thrust into this situation, this environment where there is significant adversity. While they are in that environment, that state, what does their, how is their resilience activated? What's different from that state compared to the baseline. And my understanding is that's the state assessment of psychological resilience. Then you have what's called a process assessment of psychological resilience, where let's look at how someone's resilience varies or adapts over a period of time. Let's say before someone joins the military, then they start boot camp, they join the military, then they're sent to a different country. Throughout that timeline, how does their psychological resilience adapt or change? And what are some of those factors contributing to that change? Then you have the outcome. After something terrible has happened, or after some significantly adverse thing has happened, say after got into a huge car crash. Wow, that's a terrible thing to think about. Geez, but let's say I got into a huge car crash and lost use of my legs. After that entire ordeal, surgery, being in the hospital, having to pay hospital bills, my entire life changing. How do I look? Am I still who I was? Or do I still have the same, how to explain this? Have I been able to adapt and grow from that experience? The outcome, what's the outcome here? Who am I as an outcome of that experience? And that's psychological resilience as an outcome. But I've blathered on long enough, but they're measuring state and trait assessment. So those, in my opinion, are two slightly different things. Because trait implies permanence, state implies temporary. So abstract resilience, ability to bounce back from adversity or change. Okay. Undergone many varying conceptualizations. Okay. Most recent consensus being that a combination of state and trait factors are relevant. No instruments that measure resilience with a state and trait approach. I think there are. There definitely are. Therefore, this research aimed to develop and validate state. Okay. Response theory approach to examining the psychometric properties of these stars. Okay, let's see what they do. So you can see here that their introduction is much longer than Vandermeer's. Theirs is what, like 5 paragraphs a page, maybe at most. And then we have Locke's, which is 2.5 to 3 pages worth. So let's see how they do their introduction. Not saying longer is better, absolutely not. You can still convey meaningful information in a succinct fashion. But let's go through both of them, and then we'll go through Prince Embury's again. Then we'll go through Harold's, and we'll kind of pick and choose what we like from each. Introduction. From personal trials to professional dilemmas, adversity can come in many forms, making the ability to continue on after a setback a well-researched topic in psychology. I want to download this one. And let's read it there. So I can highlight it. Resilience. So they're establishing a definition already. Second sentence refers both to the processes involved in and the characteristics of an individual's ability to bounce back from adversity or change. I'm going to highlight this citation because I want to remember it. Historically, researchers have differed in their perspectives regarding the theoretical underpinnings of this construct. Sure. These perspectives have varied from resilience as a static personality trait to the contemporary understanding that resilience is a product of both personality and contextual factors. Block and Block conceptualized resilience as a personality trait. Describe resilience in terms of ego control and ego resilience. This concept is based around psychoanalytic theory in which ego control is the degree of inhibition or expression of impulses, while ego resilience is an individual's ability to modify the expression or inhibition of their impulses. Ego control. Ego resilience. The degree of inhibition or expression of impulses is ego control. Ability to modify the expression or inhibition of their impulses according to their situation is ego resilience. Individual with high levels of ego resilience can adapt their level of ego control depending on the situation in order to avoid maladaptive coping strategies. Well, this perspective has been very influential in society. It neglects complexities of psychological principles that no individuals exist in a vacuum and constructs are independent to each other. Sure. Indeed, Richardson's meta theory of resilience and resiliency provides a model of resilience that includes both trait and conceptual. Includes both trait and conceptual factors. Richardson states that reactions to change or adversities are due to some protective or risk factors that influence one of four types of resilience outcomes. So this is interesting because we've heard these terms before, protective or risk factors. Now, where have we heard that? Let's see if they're citing the same. Let's see if Prince Embury is also citing Richardson. Here we go. So here we see Embury is kind of not criticizing Richardson, but pointing out that although many theories and models, such as Richardson, have been subjected to some empirical investigation, research findings are limited by various methodological shortcomings in their generalizability. So they're pointing out the limitations of Richardson's prior work. But they go on to mention protective factors. Yeah, so they're mentioning protective and vulnerability factors. And it's interesting because I was curious before in my future previous videos, I mentioned wanting a definition of what a protective factor or vulnerability factor was. And here we're getting it. Indeed, Richardson's meta theory of resilience includes both trait and contextualization. It states that reactions to change or adversities are due to some protective or risk factors that influence one of four types of resilient outcomes. These outcomes are ranked regarding how successful the resilience process has been. That's interesting. And how useful the adaptive mechanisms are to the individual in the long term. These changes are said to occur in everyday life and may take the form of significant life-changing events or small everyday battles. Richardson labeled the best possible outcome of these disruptions as resilience. Disruption results in growth or strengthening of personal qualities. This theory also postulates 3 other outcomes from a disruption or event. Resilience back to homeostasis, reintegration with loss, and dysfunctional reintegration. So I have seen this referenced before in Dr. Estrada's research, systematic review on measures of team resilience. Let's see if we can find it. Homeostasis. Here we go. So they've noted that this is resilience as a process, and excuse this terrible highlighting. So Richardson, so he's mentioned here too. Okay, so this is a name that I'm seeing now in multiple articles. So I'm going to want to read his article, because it probably means something. So I'm going to draw. Let's read it. So where was that? Oops. It says Richardson posits that biopsychospiritual homeostasis of individuals may be influenced by various life events. Disruptions in the homeostasis results in efforts to reintegrate in one of 4 ways: resilient reintegration, reintegration back to homeostasis, reintegration with loss, and dysfunctional reintegration. So this is not, neither of these articles, or I'll have to keep reading Locke's, but so far it seems like Estrada's article does not criticize this definition of resilience. It merely presents it as one of the existing definitions of resilience, specifically as a process. Let's see what Locke has to say. Best possible outcome, okay. In order to rely, so they also don't mention any problems or limitations or criticisms with this, whereas with Block and Block, they've mentioned Block and Block has been influential, but neglects some complexities. And then that's when they introduced Richardson. In order to reliably measure an individual's level of resilience, psychometric instruments such as the Conor Davidson resilience scale has been developed. Scale is one of the most widely used resilience scales and has been validated in clinical settings. However, it has been lack of consistent theoretical basis. Also faced criticism as it emphasizes resilience as a personality trait, which is incongruent with contemporary understandings of the construct. Development of the CDRs was largely based on observations made by the author of the personal characteristics of Sir Edward Shackleton, who led an expedition to the Antarctic in 1912. Okay. The authors noted that Shackleton possessed many qualities reflective of resilience that helped the team survive in the face of extreme odds. The inclusion of items capturing faith, for example, was derived from Shackleton's accounts of the Antarctic expedition. Other items. Five subscales. Personal competence, high standards, tenacity. Trust in one's instincts, tolerance of negative affect, and strengthening effects of stress. Positive acceptance of change and secure relationships, control, spiritual influences. See, this is what I mean. And this Locke's kind of pointing out this problem too, where this spiritual influences, it's not resilient. Spiritual influences is spiritual influences. Positive acceptance of change and secure relationships, personal competence, trust in one's instincts, control. This is where I guess it's and I can't make any strong statements because I have not read the actual scale yet or read this article specifically on the validation of this scale. But if I'm going to be so bold, based on this limited information, I'm going to say this scale is measuring some things. It's not just psychological resilience. Sure, it might be measuring psychological resilience to an extent, but to an extent, it's also measuring other things. So how good is a test that's not measuring exactly what you intend it to? However, studies have found with mixed results when examining the factor structure of the scale, with 3, 4, and 5 factor solutions being reported. Okay. Issues with inconsistent factor loadings. Again, this is to the point of to what extent is your subscales, i.e. spiritual influences, whatever, and your test by extension actually measuring what it's supposed to. Largely, issues with inconsistent factor loadings resolved with the shorter 10-item version of the scale, a unidimensional scale, measuring the ability to tolerate experiences such as change, personal problems. And okay, now here's to the point of different scholars having different definitions for resilience. The ability to tolerate experiences such as change, personal problems, illness, pressure, failure, and painful feelings. This is slightly different than say a constellation of stable dispositional characteristics that allow individuals to respond to threatening or challenging conditions, as well as to loss, trauma, adversity. Now here we also have risk and protective factors mentioned. Okay. Resilience has been conceptualized as a multi-dimensional construct that includes 3 core elements: adaptivity, recovery, and growth. Other research has also conceptualized resilience in terms of traits, processes, and outcomes that can emerge at multiple levels of analysis, including individual, family, community, unit. Research also suggests that interplay between persons and situations over time can produce prototypical trajectories that can be associated with the experience of a threatening or challenging condition. So this is really the definition that the theoretical conceptualization that I'm going to be building on. The idea that resilience includes three core elements. Associated with response to threatening and or challenging conditions. Adaptivity, growth, positive outcomes. Now that's one definition. I think this is the most comprehensive definition so far that I've seen. But this is a slightly different definition than the ability to tolerate experiences such as change, personal problems, illness. This is only talking about tolerating, not adapting, not growing, not recovering, tolerating. Tolerating is different from those other three things. So this is, again, an example of different conceptualizations of resilience result in different understandings of it, different measures used to measure it, and a conceptualization that isn't complete or isn't succinct or isn't thorough results in measures that aren't complete, that aren't succinct, that aren't thorough. Okay, so let's continue. Endorsement of these items reflects an ability to bounce back. So that's recovery, possibly growth, from the variety of challenges that can arise in life. Resilience has been consistently recognized as an important variable related to a number of other indicators of psychological functioning, including stress, positive and negative affect, and personality. Gary et al. Found that high levels of individual resilience act as a protective factor against stress and post-traumatic stress. That I want to look up. Personality also has a relationship with resilience in that a negative correlation has been found with neuroticism. So they're making all of these claims, right? They're making these claims that, sure, in past research, we found that resilience acts as a protective factor. Resilience is negatively correlated with neuroticism, but the problem here is that those scales might not be good. So they're making statements, or they're making statements or coming to findings about resilience that might be poorly informed because they are informed by measurements that are not either accurate or not consistent. Positive correlation, sure. Oops. Will it all found a negative correlation between negative affect, psychological? Sure. Understanding these, I think this is a good point, though. I'm sure that there are several meaningful correlates to psychological resilience. Stress, burnout, negative affect, well-being, there are tons. And I think that, to their point, I completely agree. Understanding these relationships is important because it provides a holistic picture of resilience's role in psychological functioning. To describe resilience as a complex construct that is difficult to define. It's been construed in numerous ways, such as being an outcome, process, trait-based, multifaceted, dynamic construct. As per Richardson's meta theory, we construe resilience as being influenced by construe resilience as being influenced by both trait level factors and state-based factors. An individual's perceived ability to cope with life stressors is likely to fluctuate depending on the nature and severity of those stressors. Oops, darn it. Conceptualization of resilience is not restricted to the experience of trauma, but aligns with other researchers who believe that resilience is relevant to understanding how individuals perceive their ability to cope with and recover from daily life hassles and adversity. So this is a theoretical point that I don't share. I think resilience is not. I think it's difficult. I don't know. I think it's difficult to measure someone's actual resilience with daily life hassles. Daily life, the word hassle means an inconvenience. It's not a significant adversity. Maybe, sure, the idea that if you have 199 problems combined, yeah, that might be significant adversity to work through. But on average, maybe saying average isn't the right word, but anecdotally, daily life hassle is not, I don't think it's gonna be a good backdrop for resilience, because resilience emerges in the face of adversity. That's when you really see when someone is resilient or whether they are not, or how their level of resilience might change. But a daily life hassle, that's a baseline, that's a status quo. But I'm not here to critique this article. I'm here to just see how they're organizing their literature review. Further, our conceptualization of resilience emphasizes that individuals' perception or appraisal of personal resilience as opposed to measuring attributes has been the focus of other measures. We believe an individual is the best judge of their internal psychological state. I don't disagree. And in this sense, we follow the lead of other self-report appraisal approaches. It's good. I like this paragraph. It's clear that a measure that captures both state and trait aspects of resilience and aligns with the contemporary theoretical understanding of the construct would be a valuable asset to a field. Conor Davidson acknowledges that resilience may either be a determinant of response or an effective exposure to stress. Either be a determinant of response. So he's saying your resilience determines how you respond to something, or an effect of being exposed to that stress. As such, a measure that captures both state and trait aspects of resilience in two clear parts could provide a way to track and predict an individual's ability to manage adversity. For example, so here what they're doing is they're building the rationale for their why their measure is going to be important or why it's worth doing this research. Information on an individual's general trait level of resiliency may be helpful in identifying people who are less likely to experience. Okay, I completely agree. I do not disagree in the slightest. Measuring individual state or current resilience, which is likely to be affected. I think this should be affected, likely to be affected by recent stressors, would indicate how they are coping with current stressors. Measuring an individual's state or current resilience indicate how they're coping with current stressors relative to their baseline levels of trait resilience. Yes. Such a measure could also indicate that an individual's ability to bounce back from a stressor, indicate an individual's ability to bounce. Such a measure could also indicate an individual's ability to bounce back. For example, an individual exposed to severe trauma, even with high trait resilience scores, would be expected to experience a drop in state resilience, and their progress managing this trauma could be tracked as their state resilience score returned to the usual range. Their progress managing this trauma could be, okay. Although we believe that measuring trait and state resilience separately will be useful for the reasons argued, we also believe it may be possible to build trait resilience. It's a pretty bold statement. Similar to what has been noted in the perfectionism literature, where modest reductions in perfectionism are seen after CBT therapy. See, this is a very interesting idea that I've been actually talking about with one of my pen pals is, let's say with guided meditation or CBT, is it possible to fundamentally change? And I don't know anything about like how brain chemistry works or how brain functioning works, but if there is evidence that cognitive behavioral therapy or guided meditation results in some actual permanent change to the brain by an extension, would that mean it's also possible to alter or build trait resilience to some extent, as Locke mentions? Having a trait-based measure of resilience could, in fact, be used to evaluate I think this is like super wishful thinking, but I would wish it. I don't blame them. I completely agree. Having a trait-based measure of resilience could, in fact, be used to evaluate the impact of resilience skill building programs on general trait resilience levels. And constructing the state measure of resilience, we followed the guidelines for scale constructions outlined by Furr. See, this is why I review other literature reviews, because stuff like this is really helpful to know that, oh, there are guidelines for scale construction, and it's helpful to mention them in my lit review. Step one, teamwork. So in their lit review, they are, or in their introduction rather, they're both reviewing the literature and they're giving a little tease or appetizer of their methods. Step one, work together to articulate the construct of interest clearly. Sure. In this case, it was the two aspects of resilience. Sure. Also decided on the context of the scale's intended use. Now this is going to help. This is the real meat and potatoes of what I'm hoping to get out of reading these literature reviews. Scale, target population, adults, da, 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 da. Step 2 shows the response format and generated the initial item pool. Elected to employ a Likert scale, opted for a wide range of response values, 7, sure. Initial item pool is generated following selection of a clear definition of resilience. After conducting extensive review of the literature, we define resilience as a perceived ability. So they are giving their definition. Perceived ability to cope with and recover from stress and ability. I agree with this definition to an extent. Sorry, I was kissing my cat. I agree with this definition to an extent. Cope with and recover. And I think it needs to be better defined. So what does cope with mean? Because my definition of resilience, or the definition that I think is the most thorough, is resilience is the ability to adapt, grow, and recover from significant adversity. So cope, does cope mean adapt, or does cope mean tolerate? So those are different things. Recover, does recover imply or include grow? Or does it just mean returning to a baseline? So for me, this definition is not complete. As per Kalish-Mueller, unless they elaborate. As per Kalish-Mueller, too sure, we also wanted items to capture adoption of positive emotional appraisal style. We then generated items that closely aligned as possible with this definition. 2 team members then reviewed each item and items of question. Items of question were discussed. Sure. Oh, there's only 2 steps. Okay. Into a small group of adults from the research team's networks, which also reviewed items and provided items noted as unclear or problematic were brought back to the research team and further discussed. Final item pool consists of 14 items. Measuring, okay. Study aimed to develop and validate a new measure of resilience, state assessment of resilience. Oops. That reflects the state and trait approach that is common throughout recent theories. Furthermore, the approach to examining the properties of stars aimed to extend beyond classical test theory approach to psychometrics, such as confirmatory factor analysis, and employ a restricted form of item response theory, rating scale Rash model. Allowing rigorous scrutiny of the measures items in terms of the reliability of their relative difficulty and personal ability estimates. So I don't know item response theory too extensively, but I know the basic idea that is that different people scale questions or items on a measure or on a test may have different levels of difficulty to answer, which results in different ratios of people guess or answering them quote unquote correctly or incorrectly. Let's look this up. Let's see. I was concerned with accurate test scoring and development of test items. You design items to measure various kinds of abilities, traits, behavior characteristics. Responses to test items can be binary or ordinal. Have been used to analyze these types of data in psychological assessments and educational testing. You can not only improve scoring accuracy, but also economize test administration by adaptively using only the discriminative items. Let's look at the Rash model, because that's what they're saying they're using in this one, right? Oops. Can you move this to the bottom? This Zoom thing is so annoying. Rating scale Rash model. All right, let's look at, I'm going to download this because it's helpful. Okay, what is the Rash model? Rash model is one of the most widely used RT when N is the latent trait and difficulty parameter of item J. Probability of the correct response is determined by the item's difficulty and the subject's ability. So this is saying that on a standardized scale, if someone is at an average ability, for example, the probability of them answering the question correctly, quote unquote correctly, is roughly 50%. But when you, I'm not sure if this is standard deviations or what, I doubt it's standard deviations, but when someone is higher in ability, fundamentally this, let's say Jeremy, Susie, Tom are in like the most educated, I don't know, in their school, whatever, in their class. They do all the work. The probability of them answering the question, it's closer to 100% compared to Emily, John, Tony, who don't do any classwork, don't listen for whatever reason. That same question, depending on how difficult it is, and in this case, this specific difficulty, they have a much less chance. So these are items with different difficulty levels, I'm assuming, comparing to the ability of the test takers, the probability that they get it right. We see here that the green is the most difficult of these three. So let's say an ability of 2 has only 50% to get it right. Whereas with these other two tests, an ability of 2, you'd have like 80%, close to 95%. So let's see how they apply this idea. Okay. So these are item curves. So this kind of shows us the discriminant properties of the question. So not necessarily that the question discriminates against people, more so that it's good at discriminating between different abilities. So let's say, for example, I went to my math class yesterday. And in my math class, I learned how to do division, right? I'm not great at math. but I'm good enough. I'm a little bit better than average. I went to that math class. And even if I'm not great at math, I can answer this question. Now, maybe someone didn't go to math class, doesn't have that ability, they can't. But it's such a steep curve that just a small change in ability as compared to like something like this right here, such a small change in ability results in such a steep difference in getting the answer correctly or not. Whereas here, such a small change in ability does not result in that much difference. So this is not a good question. This is a much better question because it's able to discriminate between people who have the ability and who don't have the ability. Okay, anyways. Let's go back. So use item response theory, the Rash model, allowing rigorous scrutiny of the measures items in terms of reliability of their relatively difficult and a person's ability estimates. So I think this is a really good idea. I like it a lot, and I might incorporate it into my own study in some way, is because there's this idea that, where is it? This article, elaborating on the conceptual underpinnings of resilience, they say that okay. They say that, where was it? What did I do? Oh, okay. Okay, so they're talking about significant adversity. And they mentioned that we concur with some other researchers that both theory and research on resiliency and resilience needs to assess significant adversity independently. And what that I think means is that different people are experiencing different levels of significant adversity. And we need to really, in order to understand resilience, we need to understand the adversity that they're going through, because these two things are inherently tied together. We can't conflate adversity with assume, that is, that everyone is experiencing the same level of adversity in their lives. That's obviously not true. So when we measure resilience, we need to be conscientious of that and assess adversity independently. And I think, I could be wrong, I think that's what they're trying to do with this item response theory, is to measure adversity differently. But let's see, I'm just going to read this full article. I'm going to change the I'm sorry, I'm going to change the content of this video. I'm just going to read this full article now because I'm very intrigued, because this is something that I want to do in my own measure validation, is measure significant measure resilience considering adversity level that the individual is facing. And I'm curious if they're actually doing that here and how they're trying to do that. Okay, STARS predicts underlying or straight resilience construct common to the items for each measure, theoretically congruent with the Rash model principle of unidimensionality. Okay, let's try to unpack this. Predicts an underlying or state or trait resilience construct common to the items for each measure. Predicts an underlying state or trait resilience. Okay, sure, yes. Congruent with the Rash model principle of unidimensionality, which is tested in addition to assumptions of local item and invariance. Rash model of principle, Rash model principle of unidynamic. Unidimensionality is that items in a questionnaire measure only a single construct. I agree, or they should, or strive to. Okay. So basically, they're saying consistent with the Rash model of IRT, our items are only going to measure a specific thing. See, I really want to see this. The study predicts that the state and trait measures will conform to the Rash model requirements as outlined in the forthcoming measure. Convergent validity. So concurrent validity with theoretically related variables will be tested as follow-up hypotheses. Okay. The study predicts that both state and trait stars measures will positively sure. CD risk includes items intended to measure trait-based resilience. Stars will correlate negatively with perceived stress and a negative affect subscale. Okay. Correlation will be stronger. Oops. We predict that the stars measure will positively. Wait. However, the correlation will be stronger for the state stars measure. Okay. I predict that. Stars measures will positively correlate with the positive affect subscale of the PANAS. So basically what they're doing is they're doing an item response theory to evidence the reliability of their measure. And then they're doing convergent and concurrent validity comparisons to evidence the, I guess, overall construct validity. And they've attempted to establish content validity by referring to, I think it's mentioned here somewhere. Reviewing each items taken to a small group of adults from the research team's networks, which also, so they're attempting to establish face validity and content validity here. Okay, so I'm mostly interested in what they did with the IRT. STARS was validated using a quantitative cross-sectional design. Sample of toke. Wait. So they're using a cross-sectional design, but not a longitudinal design, which I think is important, maybe as a follow-up, but sure. Sample of adult community participants was recruited for the study. Over 18 English competency, 274 participants. Oops. Participants reported at least one stressful life event in the past year. Healthcare issues being most frequently reported. Questions. Age and the relationship. So these. What's an SLE? They should. Something life events. That's just off the top of my head what I can come up with. Stressful life events. Okay, that makes sense. So he's experienced in the past 12 months. Oh yeah, here it is. I wish they would have, who cares? SLAs were measured using a checklist developed from the recurring themes. The examples to illustrate participants indicated SLAs were measured using a checklist. Okay, so this one's really important. Were measured using a checklist developed from recurring themes and the revised social readjustment rating scale. Examples to illustrate each participants indicated their SLE in the last 12 months, including none and other options. None and other options. Sort of developed in this study to measure state and trait resilience and to address two theoretical methodological issues associated with previous measures. In order to develop and validate this measure, test analysis and infer were followed. I think we already went through this. Construct articulation, response format selection, item development, data collection, psychometric analysis. This process resulted in a measure with two subscales, state and trait, sure. Items such as right now, I feel I am emotionally strong, and in general, I believe I am a resilient person, which were then reviewed for conceptual sense and overlap. Seven-point Likert scale. The scale was validated using the following measures. '25 item 5-point Likert scale measure that was used to establish concurrent validity. Positive, negative item personality inventory, snowball sampling. Okay, so this is what I'm really curious with in this article. star state and trait measures were examined via Rash analysis as rating scale models to examine the tenability of their Likert scale response formats, among other requirements of the Rash model using the software winter steps version. Well, the partial credit model may demonstrate a better model fitting. Okay, before I read this, I'm going to get one more cup of coffee. Okay. The moment I can cope with Okay, I'm gonna make some coffee and I'll be right back. I'm really glad that they included the actual items here. I think this is much, much better than Prince Embury's resilience scale. I think this is actually a pretty good scale. I still need to read the rest of the articles, but just judging by the questions, it seems to follow very well with their assigned definition of resilience. So let's go back to what their definition was, and then let's compare it to we define resilience as perceived ability to cope with and recover from stress and adversity. Cope with and recover, perceived ability to cope with and recover from stress and adversity. The moment I can cope with difficulties I might face in my life, believe I could recover. I'm very resilient. Recently, I have felt like I would not be able to cope with. I feel emotionally strong. Okay. All righty. In general, I believe I'm a resilient person. So one problem that I have here is I don't know. And this is just because I don't have that background or knowledge to be confident about this, but in general, I believe I'm a resilient person. I actually don't think that's a good question item because I think that you can ask something like that, like with words that are used commonly used in everyday life that everyone has generally a shared definition of, even like happy. In general, I believe I'm a happy person. In general, or at this moment, I am very hungry. These are more universally shared. The definitions for these terms or the feelings associated with these terms are more universally shared. My point is resilience. Resilient is not as common as a word that you might see crop up. And that could mean that people are defining this in different ways. So I actually don't think that this is a good, I think that this might not be a good item. Anyways, otherwise, I think it's actually good. But I'm not here to criticize specifically or scrutinize specifically this time. I'm here to better understand first how they structured their introduction, which we'll get back to. And also, I'm curious about their item response. Okay, Rash analysis as rating scale models to examine the tenability of their Likert scale response formats. This tenability. Ability to be maintained or defended against. The quality of being plausible or acceptable to a reasonable person. Okay, question the tenability of my claims. Face value, right? At the face level, is it plausible or acceptable? Okay. Examine the plausibility and acceptability of their Likert scale response formats. Well, the partial credit model may demonstrate better model fit comparison to the rating scale model. It's less restrictive in nature. What? Rating scale model was employed as the items within each measure shared an identical response format. Providing a weaker impetus for item-specific response curves. While partial credit model may demonstrate better model fit in comparison to the rating scale model due to its less restrictive nature, the rating scale model was employed as the items within each measure shared an identical response format, which is a 7-point Likert scale, providing a weaker impetus or weaker reason or urge for item-specific response curves, and its restrictive nature is beneficial in instances of smaller sample size. For the Rash model requirements, we examine the model in following order. Unidimensionality and item independence. Rating scale response category adequacy. Item misfit. And the absence of differential item functioning. Okay, so unidimensionality, so this is the first thing in the model, Rash model requirements. Unidimensionality by principal components analysis of the Rash model residuals. With residual clusters demonstrating eigenvalues less than or equal to 2.0. So the eigenvalues, I don't know like super detailed about this, but in a principal components analysis, basically you're organizing the data into components that are ordered and how much of the data is described by a specific component, if that makes sense. And the eigenvalues are basically the values assigned to those different components that explain explaining the data. That's a terrible, terrible summary. Item independence. Deemed acceptable on basis of Yan's Q3 statistic. Item response category adequacy. This is a really good article, I think, at least compared to some of the other ones. Essential category guidelines. Items sharing a common orientation. Handling observations per response category. Item fit was evaluated on the basis of infit, outfit, mean square coefficients. Person measure reliability was evaluated by person reliability index, person separation index coefficients, which are interpreted similarly to that of Cronbach's alpha coefficient to indicate a person's ability ordering reliability or to indicate the quantity of a person's strata via measure, respectively. Variance. Per the absence of differential item functioning, item invariance per the absence of differential item functioning was examined on the basis of a particular gender and previous history. Okay, this is, I think, this is what I'm looking for that I might reference or model in my own measure. Item invariance per the absence of differential item functioning, examine on the basis of participant gender and previous history of at least one stressful life event. Determine if these demographic characteristics altered participant perceptions of item difficulty. This is very important. Results. I'm mainly curious about the item invariance results, so we'll go there. Notable differential item functioning via participant gender or previous stressful life event. Were identified via significant Mantle, Heinkel, chi-square coefficients and differential item functioning contrast coefficients as outlined in the method. PIF on the basis of gender or stressful life experience status was not evidence. Item invariance appeared to be supported for the state measure. Summary, the six item four response category version of the state stars measure demonstrated good evidence of unidimensionality. No notable evidence of multidimensionality. Huh? Wait. No notable evidence of item dependency, good person and item targeting, reliability and separation. No notable evidence of differential item functioning. Okay. I think I know. I think differential item functioning is the degree to which different demographics may find specific answers harder or easier to answer in specific ways, or I guess the degree to which different demographics tend to answer questions in specific ways. Let's see if that definition is correct. Yeah. Differential item functioning is a statistical characteristic of an item that shows the extent to which the item might be measuring different abilities for members of separate groups. Okay. So this was truly a really great article to reference. So I'm going to go back to, I'm not sure how long I've been recording, but I think I'm going to end it for now and start a new recording soon because I'm worried if it's too long. But before I do, let's end it for now. And then the continuation of this video, I'm going to start recording immediately. What we're going to do is we're going to do this process for multiple different articles. But what we're going to do is we're going to real quick go through, summarize the introduction in like, how many paragraphs are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are like 10 paragraphs on average, or not on average, but as a rough guess. We're going to summarize what's happening in the introduction / lit review in 10 paragraphs. Then we're going to think about what we're going to incorporate into our own lit review / introduction. And we're going to also start talking about our own scale, what our own scale is going to measure. And we'll start to update that as we read additional articles. Okay, so I'm going to end the video for now. I'm going to start recording the next version or the next segment immediately. See you then, and thank you for watching.